Live from the CNN Centre, you're watching CNN, and this is Connect the World. I'm Linda Kincaid. Welcome back. Well, we're going to return now to our top story, a suspected chemical attack in northern Syria. Activists say dozens of people have been killed, at least 10 of them were children. More than 200 people were reportedly injured, and we do have some video of the aftermath. But first, I need to warn you that it will be difficult to watch. So this is what followed after a series of airstrikes. Activists say some of those strikes released a poisonous gas, but it's still unclear what kind of gas may have been used or who carried out the strikes. Syrian state media now say that there was an explosion at, quote, rebel poison gas factory in Idlib province. Well, our chief international correspondent, Christiane AMANPOUR, has been following the developments for us from London. Christiane, activists are blaming the Assad regime for this attack, but sadly we've seen many attacks like this in Syria before.
Well, that is the fact, and what's happened is that there is now a mounting anger again from British capitals here. The Foreign Secretary, for instance, condemned it. The French have called for an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. Russia denies that its planes were involved at all. But this is the kind of thing that's been going on in Syria at various levels over the last several years. And the last major sarin attack was by the Syrian regime in the summer of 2013. And at that time, the world and the Syrians believed that there would be punishment because President Obama, if you remember, had made that famous declaration about a red line, that if Syria, if the Assad regime were to use chemical weapons on their own people, then that would cause US and allied intervention. Well, of course, that happened and it passed without that threat being carried out. And that, many people believe, emboldened the Assad regime in the intervening years. And now we're in year 7 of this war, and this is a terrible attack that's taken place. And people had warned over the last several weeks that the Assad regime were again stepping up air bombardments of civilian targets in Idlib and around near Idlib, like in Hama, hospitals and other such things. And it's taking the same pattern as what they did in Aleppo at the end of this past year, when finally Aleppo fell and the regime took back Aleppo, along with help from their Iranian and Russian counterparts. But this is a very, very serious attack. It would amount to a war crime. And the question is, what is the West going to do about it?
Of course, as I have just stated, the state media there in Syria is pointing the finger, it seems, at the rebel groups. It's not just the government that has carried out chemical attacks. It's also been rebel groups in the past. Isn't that right?
Well, not completely right. Yes, there has been at least one chemical attack attributed to a rebel group. That was a few years ago. It was known as a blister agent called sulfur, something like that. But sarin and that lot to date has only been attributed to the government. We don't actually know what this chemical was, and investigations are still going on. All sorts of, for instance, Physicians for Human Rights, who have activists in the area, and all sorts of others are trying to figure out what it was. Doctors who are sending patients across the border to Turkey for emergency help will finally, get professional, conclusive evidence of what exactly it was. They believe it was sarin, but we're not sure at this point that it's been actually formally confirmed. The problem, of course, is that only the Assad regime and the Russians use air power to deliver these kinds of attacks, whether it's barrel bombs, whether it's bombardment of civilian and other targets, or whether in the past it's been some of these attacks. The last time it happened in 2013, it was rockets which were carrying this sarin that hit suburbs outside Damascus, and that, as I mentioned, caused a huge international ruckus, but nothing was done to stop Assad except for getting him to so-called agree to give up his chemical weapons. But clearly all these weapons have not been given up. And if it's not sarin, then they often use chemical gas, which is also illegal, but doesn't create quite the same immediate deathly result as sarin does.
As you've mentioned, Christiane, there's so much disagreement about what to do about Assad, if he is in fact behind this chemical attack. Clearly, it seems that President Trump has no plans to force him out.
as people have told me, that ship sailed a long time ago. If you remember, a few years ago, Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, got all of President Obama's top national security officials, cabinet secretaries, the head of the CIA, the head of CENTCOM, the military command, the Defense Department, to back her in a plan to arm and train the moderate rebels to try to push Assad back. That was not taken up by the Obama administration. And now the Trump administration believes that that moment is gone, and that's not what they're focusing on. You've heard from the Trump administration's UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, who said, yeah, we might not like him, but our focus is not in getting rid of him. Our focus now is ISIS. So what the Trump administration is doing is pretty much following what Obama and the allies did, which is to try to bomb ISIS and get rid of ISIS, but they're going to accelerate that. They're going to move on Raqqa. They're already surrounding Raqqa, and you've heard from Ben and others about what they've been doing in Mosul. And so that's what they are focused on right now. So it's a counter-terrorism operation, and it's not a so-called regime change or stopping the actual war. And to be frank, we all reported after the fall of Aleppo at the end of the year that while this gives President Assad much of what he wants, he wasn't going to stop there. And most people knew that Idlib would be the next target of the Assad regime because that is where many of the rebels fled after Aleppo fell. And of course, many of the civilians had to flee there as well because they couldn't go home to Aleppo. So this war is not over by any means. And this kind of massive attack that would be in contravention of international law, obviously, is presumably going to focus some minds. But it's very unclear if anything is going to be done about it at all. In fact, the likelihood is that it will not.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. We will continue to follow it closely. Christiane, AMANPOUR, always great to have your analysis on this. Thanks so much for joining us.